So I'm a born salesman. I started selling sewing machines door to door. And what I learned there, for example, is the moment of truth. That's the fear to call a client. A sort of trait that's specific to Deutsche Bank. It's an overall trait. Our sort of sector is focused on trading. I exaggerate a little bit, but it also means trading careers. I've often seen in my career that young people come in, they have fantastic educational background, fantastic internships, and then they decide that to leave an institution because they didn't reach their expectations or the organization didn't reach their expectations. It's always something.
Hi, my name is Leah Friedman. Today we're coming to you from South Kensington.
And my name is Louis Kim, and today we are joined by
Jan Olsson, CEO Nordic region at Deutsche Bank.
Thank you so much for coming in today. To kick things off, one of the first questions we want to ask you is, could you briefly tell us about your career at Deutsche Bank? And can you please highlight some key experiences that shaped your current role?
Yes. So I started at Deutsche Bank in 1988 following business school. I went to Wharton Business School in Philadelphia, graduated with an MBA and an MA because I also did the Lauder Institute there at the University of Pennsylvania. Following that brief intermezzo or a few years at the University of Pennsylvania, I joined Deutsche Bank as a graduate recruit. I joined the Frankfurt office, and I was one of the first international MBA students joining Deutsche Bank. I did the training program, and then it followed by various stages. And I was also an executive assistant to the board of Deutsche Bank. And then I went into investment banking, Morgan Grenfell, Deutsche Morgan Grenfell, and then Deutsche Bank again. That's a short version of it.
So what I want to ask is, what does executive assistant to the board look like?
It's basically a role that most companies have. It entails a lot of things. It involves writing speeches. It involves working on strategy papers about Deutsche Bank, and possibly also assisting, being a part of forming the strategy. Not that I took any decisions, but preparing the board in terms of background information, like if there's a target that you're looking at or a strategy in terms of expanding, then you prepare the board with some briefing material details. So that's one thing that it entails. The other thing is to prepare the board or the board member. You normally work for one board member for everyday occurrences. That's meetings, board meetings, and other important matters. It could be receptions, and then writing also the speeches and make sure that the board members always well prepared.
I'm curious then, out of all of your different positions, do you think this was the thing that was the most helpful in preparation for becoming a CEO?
In one way, it is very helpful because at a very early stage in your career, you get to know a lot of people and you understand how a big corporation or a big bank or a big financial institution like Deutsche Bank works. So at an early stage in your career, you have an enormous exposure. That's a positive, but of course you can be overwhelmed too. There's a lot of information, and at a certain point you have to get back to reality and actually do a job. And my experience is that an executive assistant role is good for a year or two, but not too long, because otherwise you become a permanent assistant and you have to get back and actually do a vocation, a job. And it could be in corporate finance, could be in retail banking, private banking, or wherever it is, or on the derivative side or trading. But you have to have, in my opinion, a day-to-day job at a certain time, because the executive assistant role is very general and it is a great experience, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, in a long-term career, you actually have to do something very specific.
Okay, and you spend a lot of time in Deutsche Bank or in the banking industry, and I assume there are like a lot of decision-making points. And what are some decisions that you made impacted your career path?
The first point that's very unusual in my career is that I actually stayed at the same bank, because my colleagues and my friends and sort of the general acquaintances that I have, the normality of banking is that you switch around, you work a few years at one bank or one financial institution, and then you go to another financial institution. So during my career, I took many decisions because to stay at Deutsche Bank because I liked it. It was a very dynamic environment. It was a constant change. It's a little bit like a consulting job. You work in different teams, and it was very interesting. So I decided to stay at Deutsche Bank. So that's quite unusual. You will not find many bankers who've stayed for their entire career in one financial institution.
Sorry, if you can add that. But if I may ask, is that unique within the context of Deutsche Bank, or is that a little bit of the culture that people stayed there?
I would say it's a general culture. It's not a sort of trait that's specific to Deutsche Bank. It's an overall trait. Our sort of sector is focused on trading. I exaggerate a little bit, but it also means trading careers. So you work at one financial institution, let's say 2, 3, 5, 6, 10 years or more, and then maybe you swap to another one. And that's I think that's very good because you get an exposure, but it's also an interesting career to stay at the same institution. So I think you need a little bit of both, because an institution or a big organization like Deutsche Bank, you need the culture bearers, people who have been there a long time, but at the same time you also need new inputs from the outside. So you need a little bit of both, I think, and that creates a big and a successful institution. A growing environment.
That makes sense, but I wanted to go back to it. So you feel that one of the most unique things within your career was the very, intentional decision to stay at Deutsche Bank over the course of time.
That's one major decision. It comes back to many smaller decisions, because it's not that I decided on day one that I would stay my entire career at Deutsche Bank, but along the way I took the decision when there was a temptation, ultimately always to stay at Deutsche Bank. It's slightly unusual because most of my friends have been at several financial institutions, 1, 2, 3 or more. And I took that decision. I'm happy about it. I'm very happy about it. I think I've had a great career, seen a lot, and been through an entire sort of journey.
And what caused you to keep staying, or every time you had the opportunity to leave, what kept you at Deutsche Bank?
The opportunities at Deutsche Bank were very varied and I had some very positive experiences. And then I also saw that the opportunities in terms of career progression were very good. And that's ultimately what you're always looking for. So when junior people come into Deutsche Bank, the first thing that is always on the agenda is how you progress. And I could see over the years that I could progress in Deutsche Bank, and that was for me a very positive.
Oh, okay. So we didn't get a quick chance to go over this in the background, but I know that you relocated to Stockholm to establish Deutsche Bank's presence in the Nordics. And I'm curious, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced bringing like a new brand to a new market? And were there any early successes that confirmed you were on the right path?
First of all, when you plan a career, you never know what happens. So it's always the unexpected. When you're at university, and especially at business schools like Wharton, it's very scientific, everything. You get a career path, you discuss progression, and then you enter a big organization or any organization, and the unexpected always happens. Yeah. And the biggest thing that I always have to look at is how you deal with the unexpected. It's pretty easy to deal with an expected career progression. You're 2 years associate, then you're a vice president, and then director. But it's never linear progression. There's always something unexpected that happens. Financially, either the institution is doing very well, or there are some mishaps. You never know. And you have to be prepared for that. And in my opinion, the biggest trait for young people and the biggest hurdle is how to deal with the unexpected. Because it's very easy to deal with expected career paths, that you progress linearly, very quickly, and according to expectation. But that never happens, because first of all, there are is the financial situation or the overall financial progression of the institution, positively or negatively. Then there is an enormous dynamic around you in terms of people, bosses, CEOs, other people, colleagues, people below you. And you have to deal with that. And that's an unexpected every day, positive and negative, mostly very positive, but there are also other experiences. Maybe you're working very well with your boss and suddenly there is a change and there's a new boss coming and the strategy changes, and maybe the strategy changes towards something that you don't know that well. At university, you have the opportunity here at Imperial or somewhere else, you can choose and take another subject or another vertical. In the office, it's not easy. You're stuck. I exaggerate a little bit to make a point, but you are sort of in your environment, and it's not just to choose now I switch department or I go into another vertical or become a trader or a corporate financier or a strategist. Yeah. So you are stuck, and then you have to understand how to deal with that unexpected situation. And please note, it's both positive and negative. So my advice is to you as students and here to the wider public is to learn how to deal with the unexpected, because that's when the moment of truth comes. And that's where you have to take a decision. And that's where I often had to take a decision. Do I stay at Deutsche Bank or do I move away? My view is that everything in the long run evens out and becomes actually quite positive. And the negatives are quite short-lived, because you have to know how to surpass them, how to circumvent them, how to deal with them. And that's very, very important. And in my opinion, today's students don't learn enough of that at university, because everybody's the best and the brightest. You've gone to good high schools, you have fantastic education, then your progression at university is exceptional. And then you come into environment at a financial institution or in any organization where there are lots of bright people and everybody's good. And for example, the first review you get is maybe not as expected. And how do you deal with that? And often that's the first moment of truth, because you have to rank employees, 1, 2, 3. And again, I'm making a point to exaggerate a little bit, but suddenly, there's only one person that can be ranked number 1. Yeah. And that is then a difficulty for many. And often people bite the bullet and then quit, and that's the moment of truth decision. In my opinion, that comes often too quickly with the young generation now.
And then maybe to ask a bit of an expected question.
Yes.
How do you recommend students develop a tolerance for the unexpected?
I think open-mindedness is very important, and then also perseverance, these sort of general traits that sound very easy, and also to keep your head down and actually do the work, quietly progress and think about options. But don't take any quick decisions, because the quick decisions could harm you. For example, if you decide to quit a job in a high-paying environment. I just mentioned something. You have a good job, you're vice president, and then suddenly you quit. It's not always that easy to find another option. Make sure you have the optionality ready. Because I've often seen in my career that young people come in, they have fantastic educational background, fantastic internships, and then they decide that to leave an institution because they didn't reach their expectations, or the organization didn't reach their expectations. It's always something. And then they take a quick decision and exit, and that decision has often, in my opinion, been too fast. And then the unexpected happens, and often you always want to compare yourself to the best of your friends, and there's always a person who has switched and moved into another institution and got a better job. And that's the one you compare yourself with. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you are in that position. Because the newspapers and the general press and your podcasts always talk about the positives. And the positives are when you make a progression by moving to another institution, for example, if you decide to exit. But that's not often the case. You have to have your optionality ready.
Okay, going back to the careers questions,
Yes.
you are still a CEO of a Deutsche Bank Nordic.
Yes, correct.
And What is like something special or special aspect of a Nordic market compared to like other major markets?
Okay,
Yeah.
That's a very easy question to answer. The Nordic market is very interesting because in terms of population, it's a very small region. Let's say there are 20, 25 million inhabitants in the Nordic region. Depends a little bit how you count and which countries you count into the Nordic region, but let's say there are 25 million. And that's quite small. It's smaller than many countries. That means that the home market for corporations and for companies and for organizations is very small. Maybe they sell 95% or more of their products internationally. So it's extremely international environment. So that's one characteristic of the Nordic region. So you immediately see how global the environment is in the Nordic region and the corporations, and how open-minded these corporations are with people all over the world and a very small presence maybe in the home country. You have many, I don't want to mention any names because there are so many large brand names in the Nordic region that are globally maybe much bigger name than at home and more better known internationally. So that's one characteristic. The other characteristic is, in my opinion, one of the best functioning capital markets, both debt and equity, in Europe. So it's a very open capital markets society. It's easy to acquire companies. It's easy to sell companies. It's easy to finance companies over the capital in the capital market. So it's an open society in terms of that, and more so than many other countries. And then it has a very good regulatory environment, very advanced. So those are some of the characteristics. And in my opinion, also some of the best managers come out of the Nordic region globally, because it's such an open and dynamic environment that you can export those skills internationally. And we see many CEOs and many important business individuals coming from the Nordic region right now.
Just like Jan Olsson.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer.
Absolutely.
And like, I'm just a bit curious, like, if there are not too many people living in Nordic, maybe the corporate banking or investment banking division might work, but wouldn't it be a bit hard for retail banking to work in there?
So the Nordic region in terms of retail banking is one of the most consolidated markets globally, and definitely in Europe. In many countries you have up to 2,000 banks in some countries. In the Nordic region you have very few financial institutions on the retail side because they have merged. You have, in my opinion, 5, 6, 7 major names on the retail banking side, and they are across the borders. It's very unusual because the regulatory environment in Europe is very country and focused according to geographic jurisdictions. In my opinion, Europe has to open itself up, and there needs to be a banking union, a capital markets union. And I know we have spoken about that a long time here in Europe, but that has to speed up because we have to compete on a global market, and the regulatory environment and framework has to be more unified in Europe. And it has to be easier to acquire, let's say, financial institutions in other countries. We have seen a few transactions across the borders, but not enough, because we have to compete against major markets such as the United States right now, and in Asia major markets. And in my opinion, Europe needs that, and that's the way I see business, one of the major steps forward for Europe if we want to compete, and it should be that.
So I wanted to ask, reflecting on the many deals that you've done, what stands out as particularly memorable and challenging?
Okay, I don't want to go into specific names because I obviously worked on a lot of deals. But one thing I can tell you, that you should always challenge the truth. When you come into a big environment, in a big environment I mean a big organization, then there are many truths about clients, about people. And one general truth that you often see is that client never does a deal. I know that client for 20 years, for 10 years, it's never a deal. And one of the things I've always noticed, you have to challenge that. Because there's no such thing as an institution that you cannot generalize about a company or client that they don't do deals. So I challenge that. And that's very important when you are young and coming into an organization. Don't take these general accepted truths as reality. It's totally wrong. You have to challenge the day-to-day operations, because in big organizations, sort of certain things emerge over years, over a long period of time, and views on clients, views on companies, views on regions. In my opinion, young people who come into an organization should challenge that. And that's what I did. And one of my biggest success stories, and it became a huge client of Deutsche Bank, was to challenge that. Because there was a client in the Nordic region where the general acceptance and the general view was that this client would never do a deal. And that became one of our largest clients. And that's important, in my opinion, that you challenge these accepted truths.
And how would you advise, the imperial new grad coming into, a very large financial institution? How do they challenge? How do they get their voice heard?
I think, first of all, any grad, like from Imperial or any other prestigious university or any university globally, has a wide spectrum of ideas and thoughts. And you see often with your eyes when you come in what maybe is one of these truths. And you have to check that out when you arrive. And it can be about a client, it can be about people. And often, even today, we had a client in France here the other day, and then the view was that client doesn't like our financial institution. But I said, there's no such thing. These companies have so many people. It is different verticals within the client, and there will be different views. We don't have one view. There are many views in an organization, because there are often thousands of people in an organization, or much more than that. So when one part, often, if you're looking for a job, for example, you could say this bank or this financial institution likes students from this university or that university. That's often not true. We like them from all universities. So you have to challenge a little bit the perception. That's my view. Very strong. I think that's the way you move forward.
But to ask more specifically.
Yes.
Do you have any techniques or ways of communicating that often junior people could utilize when trying to challenge prevailing wisdom?
Okay, the first one is very easy. Never take a no for an answer.
Okay.
So that's so if you, for example, apply for a job, let's talk very specifically here. Then the normal answer is we're full, it's the wrong date, it's the wrong program, it's this and that. That's where you have to start to challenge it. Maybe there's another way in. Like if you look at our institution, there are many ways into a bank in terms of a career. There are graduate programs, there are trainee programs, there are other type of programs, there are internships. And you have to challenge that. You have to look. Don't take a no for an answer. I got no's all the time. I get that even today from clients. I don't want to do business. But then you try another avenue. You try another individual at the client. And that's extremely important. If you just take the no, then it's a no, and then you remain there, and you have to challenge that.
I like it.
Yes, so I don't know you have noticed, but I also used to work in a bank in South Korea, commercial bank. And I started my job in 2017, and since then, a lot of things have changed, like regulations and all this political geographics, and also the cryptocurrencies popping up. So, what do you think is a opportunity for the Deutsche Bank in next 10 years, or any risk for Deutsche Bank in next 10 years?
I think number one, we are of course a huge financial institution with many verticals within the group, and it's all the way from investment banking to retail banking and everything in between. Just to make it simple here in this situation here that we're discussing, I think there are opportunities everywhere. Retail is a huge opportunity. There are always individuals who need financing or credit cards or payments. So that's a huge area. And that is for every day. Every person needs that. So that's an area that will always grow. And then if you take the other spectrum, investment banking, just to take it on the other side, companies and institutions always need advice, always need financing. And there's always a weak company, there's always a strong company, and this changes all the time. And that's the beauty of mergers and acquisitions. There's always a new strong player, and there's always a new weak player, and that makes it a dynamic environment. I've never seen a weak M&A environment, because there's always a new player that is weak, and there's always a new player that's strong. And right now we have many tech companies that are very strong and very powerful, and they can acquire other companies because they have the currency. I just take that as an example, or healthcare companies are very strong. You can take any sector, but there are many strong companies, but there are many new weak companies too, and the stronger normally acquire the weaker.
But like, I totally agree with, like, there are like a lot of chances in retail banking, corporate banking, investment banking, etc. But right now AI is like kind of popping up and doing all the jobs for the bankers. So
Yeah.
I think it's like time of a crisis for the bankers, not the bank itself.
I disagree completely.
Really?
I think there's always an important input from human interaction. For example, in my business, a meeting face to face or on Teams, but face to face in particular, cannot be exchanged against anything else. So I think that human touch is always important, and that goes all the way from retail banking, talking to a client or meeting a client, all the way to investment banking and everything in between. So even though AI is a huge development, it's a very important development, a very positive development. Right now, it can assist a lot in the day-to-day business, but I think the human element will always be there, and you will always find that human interaction will lead to positive results.
Agree.
So I have two questions, but the first is, one of the themes that I've noticed is it seems like you're a contrarian. I wanted to ask, are you a born contrarian, or do you think it's a developable skill?
It's a skill that you can develop, and I wouldn't say that I'm contrarian, but I think that I'm ambitious and try to challenge.
Yeah.
So I'm a born salesman. I
Yes.
started selling sewing machines door to door. And what I learned there, for example, is the moment of truth. That's the fear to call a client. That's the first moment of truth that you see when you're door-to-door salesman. And I loved that career because it was very difficult for me. I was highly educated at the time. I came back to Scandinavia from an international educational background. And for a few months, I decided to take that job, to test it, how it is, and not to sit at home also. So I took that job. And the training program was 3 days. And the first day was how to actually get over that fear, how to knock on a door and to actually call on a client. And this is something that I see every day, even today.
If I may ask, what were some of those key insights that the training program gave you that has served you so well?
This is to overcome this fear.
Yeah.
Because you have to imagine when you come with a very interesting educational background and you have to knock doors and make sure that the door opens.
Yeah.
There's a fear in the beginning, because I remember that. It was fearful. I was fearful going into a big building, then knocking on doors. You don't know what's behind the door. There's a fear. So the first week or the first few days, you cannot do it alone.
Okay.
Because it's too difficult to overcome that. So what I learned, the first thing is to overcome that fear. And I see it every day today in the financial institutions. People always, including myself often, it's always very easy to say no to make that extra call. We don't have enough information. We cannot make that call. Or let's have an internal call and discuss what we are going to discuss with the client. And these are elements of fear that come up, because then you can postpone that call or that meeting with the client. And I see it every day. And this was something that serves me very positively from that experience. The next thing that you learn there in that course is what also serves me every day is there's a second moment of truth. That's when the door opens. So one thing you always learn there, if the door closes again, there will never be a deal.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure to maintain the dialogue. So when I call on a client, I try to pick something that's maybe unrelated to the situation I'm calling about, just to keep the conversation going and gain some time. So that's the second moment of truth, how to maintain an open door policy and that it doesn't close. And then the third is then execution and executing the deal. That's very simplified. But for me, this was a great education, better than a lot of other things.
And on a smaller level, do you have any recommendations of how students can start developing those skills within university?
Yes. Sometimes be out there, be part of societies, try to learn from interaction, human interaction. I think sitting in in a library and so on is very important, of course, but you have to add other skills because you will not sell just by emails or just by analysis. You have to be out there and interact. So if I give some advice to you here as students is, of course, be academic, you should be brilliant and all that stuff. That's important. But try to develop some extracurricular skills that are outside of that, if it's in a teamwork environment, sports, or whatever it is, and try to be part of societies like you are here, for example, right now, and meeting me.
I guess that's a great segue into Joint Investment Society. You get to meet amazing people like Jan Olsson.
So our last question will be, how should students in Imperial should reach out to you? What's the way?
It's very easy. I'm always available on LinkedIn or other channels, and you can always go through those or through Deutsche Bank. Of course, I have an email address there, and you can write me an email on my Deutsche Bank email address.
Have you had students do that for you before?
Yes, often. I always answer.
Wow.
Because I think it is important also to, in terms of communicating with individuals, when people contact you, you never know who is contacting you, to always answer very positively to see what is behind that contact. And it could be an application or something else, a question about something else.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for coming, and this has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, and it's been great to be here at Imperial.
Thank you very much.
Credit to our producers, Aaliyah Friedman, Louis Kim. Head of Marketing, Samhat Raman. Juniors, Ken Zhang, Angie Zhao. Head of Scriptwriting, Alfred Choi. Juniors, Aditya Muthakumar, Kwan Lin. Head Liaison, Lucrezia Poloni. Junior, Ekaterina Vitor. Head of Audio, Isaac Chu. Junior, Cyrus Lee. Head of Sponsorship, Sami Liu and Vladimir Dmitriev. Juniors, Leo Lee, Jamila Tabet, Utkarsh Jetli. As a reminder, the purpose of this podcast is educational content. Our stock pitch is meant to showcase student research and how to perform a pitch, not to be taken as investment advice.